Corncrake LIFE team and the MPWS, you're all very welcome here to the majestic west of Ireland, to County Mayo. We're delighted to host you for this Corncrake Conservation Workshop. I just have a few brief introductory notes here. So for the next 2 days, you can expect fine weather, poor weather, high winds, no winds, rain, sleet, snow, and possibly even a tornado, and that's just before lunchtime. Now, the reality is that this is a landscape on the edge, and that is why we love it. This area is shaped by the wind and the rain, and then it is shaped by the hands of people, and then it is reshaped again by the wind and the rain, and this is a cycle that has gone on now for millennia. Indeed, Belmullet just celebrated its 200th anniversary at the weekend. People have been living on this landscape since the ice retreated from it. It's an ever-changing place, the Mullet Peninsula. It's extremely dynamic, but some things are very, very enduring here, such as the warm welcome you'll receive from the people of Mayo, and indeed, by extension, from the people of Ireland. For our international attendees here at the workshop, Mayo is world famous for its salmon fishing on the River Moy, its sprawling and majestic coastline with beaches and cliffs, its wild beauty, its haunting scenery, and of course it's famous for its corncrakes. The Mullet Peninsula, of which you will only see a very thin sliver during your visit here on your field excursions, hosts over a quarter of the national population of corncrakes, and it has seen a remarkable doubling of the number of birds here in the past few years. The peninsula itself is home to a superb range of coastal habitats and species, all of which interact with a type of farming and land use that has remained sympathetic to wildlife, whereas the rest of the country we have lost so many habitats and species. And this is mirrored in other areas where our project operates in North and West Donegal and Connemara, where this type of farming is why we have so much wildlife and such richness. We are very grateful that this workshop is being attended by some of the participants in our project, as the future of the Crex, as we like to call it, is so much more in their hands than it actually is in ours. And indeed, the packs that you received on registration and the key rings that were in them were made by one of our farmers, Martin Clinton from Fanet Head. So thanks very much, Martin. I don't know where you're sitting, but yeah, multi-talented people that we work with. Of course, as well as the aforementioned attributes of County Mayo, might I also add that Mayo is very famous for its pubs and hospitality. However, should you find yourself in the bar this evening, don't ask the barman for a cocktail called the Sam Maguire Cup, because it can take a remarkable 73 years for a Mayo man to make one. Slow clap there. Someone from Sligo should not be making fun of football teams. Anyhow, what I am delighted to say is that this workshop will be chaired by none other than Alan Lauder. It is a unique space for us to bring together the multitude of people who work and whose lives intersect with the conservation of this remarkable little bird. It's a space for us to talk, to listen, to debate, to challenge, and to identify a route forward for the restoration of this iconic summer visitor to our landscape. For the next 2 days, which Alan will soon outline, it's absolutely brimming with activity, with opportunity, and with the promise that upon leaving here, all of us will hopefully have learned something, and hopefully, we'll have sown the seed for future endeavours that, like the corncrake themselves, will not be limited by borders. So, I have, before I introduce the chair, I just have a few little bits of housekeeping to do as part of my host duties. So our team, the Corncrake LIFE team, we're here to host you, but you'll have to buy your own drinks, unless I owe you a drink, and there's a reasonable chance of that. If you're having any difficulties, any queries, please come to us. We're here to help as much as we can. My second piece of housekeeping is that if you are checking out of the hotel tomorrow, and this is actual housekeeping, we have been asked by the hotel, who have been fantastic in their facilitation, please check out before your site visit, because you will not be back until lunchtime and they need their rooms back. The hotel has been fantastic and they will accommodate your luggage and everything else, so just bear that in mind for the morning. And my final piece of housekeeping is a request. I want you all to just bear one thing in mind. You are here because corncrakes are in serious trouble. And corncrakes are in serious trouble because the landscape that supports them is in serious trouble. And the landscape is in trouble because the people who farm that landscape are in trouble. So I want you to bear in mind that this is a complex matter, and it's a matter that requires a very holistic solution. So I ask you to all engage, and I ask you to be brave in your commitments. So now, our chairperson and MC for the next 2 days is Alan Lauder. Alan will be known to many of you. He's worked for more than 35 years in niche conservation, mainly dealing with birds and habitat management. He's worked on corncrake initiatives for over 20 years in Scotland and Ireland through RSPB and Birdwatch Ireland. As an independent nature conservation specialist, he sits on the steering groups of our sister project, Life on Macker, and the Cooler Crofoiga EIP in County Donegal. He's an ornithological advisor to the new MPWS and Department of Agriculture funded Breeding Wader EIP, and he chaired the Curlew Task Force in Ireland from 2017 to 2019. Alan is also Sage Counsel to us at Corncrake LIFE. He's a friend to our project and someone we can bounce a lot of ideas of, and I know that we're going to be in good hands for the next 2 days. So it's over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That felt like a very grand welcome. I'm far too modest for that sort of thing. Diagweef Galer agus Fáilte Bell Inverted. We're in the Gaeltacht, but this is the best of my extremely basic Irish and Scots Gaelic can combine to welcome you. So I'm sorry for that. You're all very welcome to Belmullet and to this Corncrake Life workshop. My name is Alan. I'm an independent ornithologist and conservation consultant, and I'm very pleased to try to escort you all through the next couple of days in conjunction with John, Julie and the team who have organised this very, very well indeed. John first came to me to ask about some sort of role in chairing a conference or workshop like this after we'd been enthusiastically planning corncrake habitat measures on a site in Donegal sometime last year. I was pleased to take up the offer to do what I can for the project. My task focuses today on welcoming my task of welcoming you focuses mainly on taking you through an outline for the next 2 days. But I'd like you to indulge me just for a couple of minutes to tell you something of my own connection to corncrakes, and this is not meant to be a CV. It's simply a little personal story, which I'm sure will resonate with some of your own stories, and which might bind us all in some way in solidarity for this remarkable bird. It's 1973. I was 5 years old. I know I've aged well. So, I'd been already interested in birds for a year or two from a very early age. I'd been given my first bird book, the Observer's Book of Birds, and there was a little black and white illustration of a corncrake in it, which looked remarkably similar to the little black and white illustration of spotted crake right next to it. But there you go. I'd never seen one, but apparently it was quite common, according to the Observer's Book of Birds. I grew up in rural southeast Scotland. My father an estate worker and gamekeeper, and my grandfather a ploughman on a local farm. He was a big man, and he knew the countryside very well. He would take me around the farm at a very early age, and we'd find birds' nests. I still remember him giving me lifts on the tractor when he was sowing crops to help him move lapwing nests out the way. He'd get me to jump down, pick up the eggs, drive on, get me to make another little hollow and put the eggs back in it. One day, probably in May, mid-May, I remember the hawthorn flowers, so it was about then, he showed me a corncrake nest that he'd found. Quite an early nest, I think it probably would be fair to say, but he knew they were getting scarce, so he wanted to show me it. And he reminded me of that about 4 years later in 1977 when he passed away. I hadn't seen another corncrake, and neither had he in between those times. And it may have been the last corncrake in my county where I grew up. It took until 1986 before I saw another on Skye I was waiting for the ferry from Uig to North Uist for birding and fishing and camping and stuff you do as a late teenager. And I heard two and saw one in flight in fields quite close to the ferry terminal. I don't know if they're still in that area. But I went on to see many more on North Uist. But that one, sort of my first proper one as an adult, stays with me. 2 years later, I was in the Burren in County Clare on a field course from Stirling University, botany field course. And every night after a good few Guinnesses in Bophy Quinn's pub in Corofin, I'd stumble back to the field centre and I'd hear two corncrakes close to the road on the way back. And I really regretted not submitting them to the bird atlas that was ongoing at that time, because that square is unoccupied in the 1988 to 91 atlas. And I should have done that, and I regret that. I've gone on to have a career with corncrakes, featuring heavily at various times. In the 2000s with RSPB on Col, Tiree and Isla, then with Birdwatch Ireland for a few years over here, and now as a consultant in Ireland, I've been invited to participate in many corncrake initiatives and write plans and so on. But I have to say, I don't think I've been as hopeful for corncrake conservation in Ireland as I am right now today. I think that the landscape of nature conservation has changed remarkably in Ireland. And though I'm never complacent, the road ahead for the bird remains extremely challenging. I am pretty hopeful for it. We are across Europe, and we've got representatives from Europe here today, in this together, as they say, and it's extremely pleasing to be involved in this meeting of minds, helping us to continue to learn and develop our approaches and to meet the new demands that the bird now faces. So thank you for indulging me. I'll just give you a little outline of the plan for the next couple of days. So today we're going to start with a couple of sessions. This morning, talks on a range of current issues in concrete conservation. Lunch will follow session 1. Session 3 later on focuses on research and initiatives and is a bit more of a rapid fire session. And then tonight, a high spot after dinner at 9, we'll be heading out on a tour to hear birds in the local area, led by John and team. Tomorrow, you will be at a bus. You will be at a bus at 08:50 hours. Okay, we will make sure of that, no matter how much you've had to drink in the bar tonight. Departing at 9 a.m. sharp, you check the guide in your pack for which bus you'll be in. There's a little guide in there. And if you don't have an allocation, speak to John or to Julie to get yourself a bus. Over lunch tomorrow, we'll invite you to talk to each other again, make comments on the comments board. Actually, you can make comments on today as well if you want to just jot down a few thoughts on there. Really would welcome your comments. Flip chart there. Once it fills up, we'll take it away and put another one up. And we'll then have workshops after lunch tomorrow, and you'll find the topics on these in your agenda. And I'd invite you to study those topics and think about them a little bit before we head into them. We'll finish tomorrow by 6 o'clock. So in your registration pack, there's a lot of things, some great little take-home freebies and stuff. Fantastic, great, just to remind you how great corncrakes are, and some information about the next 2 days. So I'd encourage you to look at that, particularly the table layout and where you're going to be in your groups for workshops and so on. You can sit anywhere today, but tomorrow we want you to be on the right table at the right time. Moving on, it's time to formally open the workshop, and I'd like to invite Minister Malcolm Noonan, TD, Minister for State for Nature, Heritage and Electoral Reform, to address you all. I'm glad to say that under Malcolm's leadership, we're seeing a real high spot for nature conservation in the country, and I'd like to invite you, Minister, to come and address us.
Gormagat Alan agus díomh go léir maidin. Táthas or ma bheith an seo live bélamorg inniu an Cairlan seo a seola go hifgúil. Bátlam buchas a gháil leis an banistóir tunscadal John Carey as an cuire a thuirt Good morning, everyone. It is a great privilege to be with you here this morning, and hopefully I'm staying, thanks to the Dáil schedule, I'll be able to stay for the day, and looking forward to tonight as well. So I'm really looking forward to the day's proceedings and the papers that will be presented. And again, to thank John Carey for the invitation to join you here this morning at this really important event, something that's very, very close to my own heart. I just want to thank also to welcome all of our overseas visitors from Scotland, from England, from France, Belgium and Switzerland. Céad míle fáilte to all. And again, Scottish brought us some shortbread, so looking forward to the other goodies from the other countries during the tea break later on. No pressure. I think that the presence of so many people from all of these countries is really a powerful indicator of the reach of this really amazing little bird and the efforts that are being made by people to protect it. And you know, again, it just as well for me how much the corncrake is becoming a symbol for our wider efforts to restore nature here in Ireland as well. And it really has taken to the heart of the Irish people as well. I'm really looking forward to listening to all of your experiences as well. Corncrakes have been a feature of Ireland's grassland and farming landscapes for many generations, and their arrival heralded the start of the summer and the beginning of a schedule of work that brought family, neighbours and communities together. The bird's persistence and determination to raise its voice was an attribute that didn't always win it friends, but invariably it made it conspicuous, a bit like myself really. The male bird's unique call in many ways offered a sacrificial distraction to the real treasure, and that being the female corncrake on her nest. Of course, ultimately, it is the female bird that requires protection, and too often, she is the one who suffered the most. Her instinct to protect and to nourish her young left her vulnerable and exposed. Today, the corncrake's voice has been hushed, along with the voices of many other creatures with whom we've had previously lived in a dynamic harmony. The corn bunting comes to mind. The last pair were known here on the Mullet Peninsula, and they're gone now too, and fear of other losses is all too real in the depths of what is a biodiversity crisis. We are in a real race against time. Corncrakes require a slower pace, whether it be that the speed of the mower in a field or simply the cadence of life. There is a richness to be found in finding the time to do more by simply doing less. Healthy landscapes that support both communities and nature are an ambition we all need to realise across Europe, and I know that's something that John feels passionately about as well. Here on the Mullet Peninsula, and indeed across the western seaboard, where corncrakes can still be heard, we are still gifted with landscapes that support that fine balance between nature and communities. And these things are not mutually exclusive. People need to be reconnected and reintroduced with the natural world around us. And this is our great collective challenge. I visited many places where farming and nature coexist, and despite the narratives to the contrary, I've seen that when leadership emerges on the side of nature conservation and on the side of local people who know the land the best, great things can come. Farmers in these high nature value areas increasingly find themselves in receipt of payments for services that are fundamental to our well-being, such as clean water, water attenuation, carbon sequestration and the conservation of wildlife. Not too long ago, these benefits were thought as intangible or nice to have, largely because they had no market value. But now we know better. Rewarding farmers to manage their land for wildlife and with wildlife is without doubt the future that we all need to embrace. We've seen the progress in the past few years where an approach of results-based agri-environmental schemes are paving the way now to new and better outcomes to managing our landscapes. So slowly the polarised narrative is drifting as we realise that farming needs nature and nature needs farming and needs farmers. In the past 5 years, the cumulative efforts of the Corncrake LIFE project and the MPWS Corncrake programme has seen a 35% increase in the national corncrake population. The birds had reached their lowest ebb in the 1990s, and despite the loss of populations in the Shannon Callows and the Moy, they held on. Like all LIFE projects, partnerships and collaboration are an essential component, and Corncrake LIFE is a collaboration between the National Parks and Wildlife Service, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Atlantic Technological University, Photo Wildlife Park. It's great to see Sean here again, and they've partnered with us on many projects, such as, along with Curlews and Natterjacks and Údarás na Gaeltachta. From focusing on saving individual birds to focusing now on landscapes as a whole, we have seen remarkable progress. And indeed, Mayo has become a confluence of many interrelated life projects that are learning from each other, and a real testbed, I think, from an Irish context on landscape scale nature restoration. And I've seen during my own tenure as Minister with responsibility for nature conservation how it's people that drive this change and this change in attitudes. And although politics may now be slow and has been slow to respond at first, it is responding now because people are increasingly demanding, and it's something that I've seen particularly in the last 4 years in the Dáil. We've had more debates on nature and more debates on biodiversity, I think, than in the history of the Oireachtas. So I think it is really transformational. The Corncrake has woven its way into our life, into our art, into our literature, into our songs and our poetry. And in various poems, the Corncrake has been used as a metaphor by poets for the decline of the Irish language, as Pádraig finished this poem, Don Trénach, to the Corncrake, where he says, Is trúlam don cás, agus is róha mar a higam dit, mar is álaigh an scéal le glór na géal, is tá imacht as an las an dóchas. O gentle Corncrake, I feel for you and understand your plight, because it's like that of the Gaels, whose voice is vanishing in a ray of hope. My hope is that both the Irish language and the Corncrake will continue to survive and thrive as an intrinsic part of our cultural landscape. This hope is reflected in the title of today's workshop, Crex Futures Together, and we're looking to the months and years and decades ahead to ensure that they provide a space for this unique and much-loved bird. In conclusion, I just want to welcome you all. I look forward to the proceedings, and again, I look forward to particularly to tonight, because I certainly have never heard the Corncrake in the landscape before, so I'm really looking forward to a very interesting day and a really enjoyable evening this evening as well. So, go míle maith go léir.
Many thanks, Minister. It's a fantastic start, really bringing home the cultural references as well, and the importance of community and people in leadership and in achieving conservation of this bird. Our first session kicks off with Chris Bailey from the RSPB, talking about the changing populations of Corncrake in Western Europe, with Scotland as a case study. Sadly, I didn't get to work with Chris at RSPB, where we didn't quite overlap, but Chris is advisory manager with RSPB Scotland and leads the coordination of RSPB's work on Corncrake, and is a board member of Scotland's new Corncrake Calling project. So, Chris, you're welcome up stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting us to come and speak. I'm going to sort of rattle through slides because I can see Alan's already got the sort of 5-minute warning sign ready for me if I go overboard. Just to sort of provide some background, so corncrakes are a species that you can see right from sort of Russia's side, but in terms of the context of corncrake populations worldwide, the Irish populations and the UK populations are on the western side of the sort of range, and are really sort of important. And what's been happening over the recent decades has had big impacts in terms of the populations and numbers, particularly of the western birds. What I'll do is talk mostly about our work in Scotland, how we've been trying to help corncrakes over the last few years, give you some indication as to how the populations have decreased over time, as well as the range. So this map here, or these series of maps, shows how the corncrake populations across Britain have decreased in numbers and decreased in size. So if you were back in the 19th century, you would have been able to hear them pretty much anywhere within Britain. And gradually, over time, it sort of restricted to sort of smaller and smaller areas. And now the situation is that from the point of view of Britain population, it's pretty much the Isles of Scotland, a few birds on Northern Ireland, and then the sort of reintroduced populations down in England that are the sort of, inverted commas, stronghold of the populations as they currently stand. So big decrease in numbers, big decrease in ranges over time, and this is mirrored across quite a lot of the Western populations, whether you're looking at France, into Germany and sort of elsewhere. So populations generally have been going down in numbers. From an RSPB perspective, we've been working in Scotland since the sort of late 1980s. Firstly, to sort of try and understand the reasons for the declines, and then sort of try and roll out methods to improve the situation. These are the maps Alan mentioned very briefly. He did BTO Atlas surveys. So just a contrast between how the populations have changed over time between the two atlases. So big decrease in range and fewer and fewer birds. These maps have also got Ireland on as well, obviously. And as you can see, yeah, the populations have declined a lot over the period of time. And that's the reason that we're doing the work in Corncrake calling in Scotland. And it's the reason that these populations and the work that you're doing in Ireland here. I'm based in Edinburgh, and my office is based right in the centre of Edinburgh. And this sort of just goes to briefly show how things have changed. So this is a quote from Henry Cockburn. So the First Minister is basically, their central office is on the sort of right-hand side of the picture there. This is Charlotte Square, so right in the centre of Edinburgh, and back in the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s, you would have heard regularly corncrakes calling from that sort of period of time. There was also lots of records of corncrakes being eaten and within cookbooks and things like that. So they were relatively common species that obviously over time the numbers have declined. And a lot of it has come down to the fact that there's been massive changes in the way that the landscapes are farmed. Big changes in the way that food is produced, and farmers obviously having to become more intensive in order to survive and to make a living. It's not the farmer's fault, so it's basically how the systems have changed. And the places, certainly in Scotland, where they've hung on, are the places where we've had the biggest, or we've been able to keep the more sort of traditional sort of farming systems in place. And so that's the places where the really special areas, both from a wildlife perspective, but also for species like corncrakes. So drilling down into the populations and where they are in Scotland at the moment, on the sort of right-hand side, we've got small populations on Orkney. Then in the middle bit, you've got the sort of Durness. There's a few birds in Durness on the mainlands of Scotland. And then moving over to the sort of left-hand side, you've got the Inner and Outer Hebridean Islands and Skye. We've got a number of staff who are based on the islands who are in this conference. Please do speak to them as you sort of get through the day. We're working on all of those areas as RSPB. We've got staff on the various islands, and we're trying to work with the farmers and the crofters to make improvements, to manage their land, for both from the point of view of making sure that they can farm sustainably in terms of making an income, but also in terms of helping wildlife and helping corncrakes. Back in the sort of late 1980s, when the last survey was done, we had in Scotland about 550 calling males, and RSPB was really concerned because the numbers have been carrying on going down. And so we did lots of research to try and understand the causes of the declines. This work was led by Professor Rees-Green, who's produced a whole series of papers looking at how the populations have changed and altered over time, did lots of basic understanding of the ecology of the species. And what we found out was that most of the birds are returning to pretty much the same places year on year. So sort of 90% of the adults return within 10 kilometres of where they were born. The juveniles will come back almost to the same places. The other really important factor, so I mean I work on a range of different species, ranging from curlew to lapwings to black grouse. But for corncrakes, one of the really crucial things is that they are relatively short-lived birds as well. So you're talking about only sort of 23 to 30% of the birds who are juveniles, which basically leave to go to Africa, returning the following year. So from a point of view of working with the farmers and the crofters, you have to continue to work with them on an annual basis to try and make sure that you're providing the right habitats and the right sort of management for the species. The research then led us to come up with solutions, and this is our version, so Corncrake Calling's version of the leaflet that we produced for farmers and for advisors to try and explain what a corncrake needs in terms of habitats, ranging from the early cover to the late covers to how to cut. So this is all the sorts of things that you're going to, I'm assuming we're going to see through the project here. We've got our own versions within sort of Scottish agri-environments. And as I say, this is a proven recipe for how you can increase corncrake populations if you do it at the right sort of scale and the right size and working with the farmers and landowners. The other thing about our research showed that, yes, we might be focusing on corncrakes. We might be thinking about corncrakes, and we as a bird organisation are obviously thinking a lot about the corncrake populations. But our research also demonstrated that if we were working for corncrakes, we're working for beetles, we're working for bugs, we're working for plants, a whole range of different taxa will benefit from the corncrake management that are going on. There's some really good papers that have come out from RSPB which sort of demonstrate the benefits for a whole wider variety of other species, including great yellow bumblebees. So, yeah, the long and short of it was that, back in the late 80s, we did the research. In the early 90s, we found the solution, well, what we thought were the solutions, and then sort of started to roll them out, working with government, working with RSPB staff on the ground, advisors. And we went from the very low period of this graph of 430 birds up until 2014, we'd managed to get it up to 1,200, just over 1,200 birds in terms of numbers. So a great result in terms of increasing the numbers of corncrakes. But one of the things we were also hoping to do was to increase the range, and that's probably one of the things we haven't been quite so successful at in terms of the range, in fact, has probably contracted since we carried on the research, but the numbers actually sort of increased. What you'll also notice from this graph is that from sort of 2014 onwards, there's been a 30% decline again. And because of that, we started off the Corncrake Calling project, which I'll come on and talk to in a second. We think part of this is down to changes in the agricultural schemes and the agricultural funding that was available to the farmers. And that meant that the farmers then made slightly different choices. And consequently, yeah, the current schemes were possibly less attractive than the previous schemes. And consequently, there was less positive management. So within a period of 5 years or so, from 2014 to 2019, there was about a 30% decline in numbers. RSPB became really concerned about that. And so we then sort of got funding, £750,000 worth of funding from the National Lottery to basically work on corncrakes through the Corncrake Calling project. not going to dwell on this for very long, but this is just sort of a breakdown of all the different islands in terms of numbers. So we've got everything from very small numbers running right the way up to 300 birds on Tyree. They are spread around, but yeah, there are some really core areas which are really important for the corncrake populations. So yeah, as I say, 2019, 2020, just really bad timing in terms of the start of COVID. Really bad timing to try and start the project off. But we started off Corncrake Calling. We're working with the farmers and landowners to try and improve the amount of land that's positively managed for corncrakes. Through that funding, we increased our advisory capacity. Louise is in the audience. She's one of the staff that's working on the Inner Hebridean Islands. We've got Shona, who's working on Lewis, and they're assisting farmers and landowners in trying to increase the number of people getting involved in agri-environment schemes, trying to provide additional training and support for agents as they put applications in. We're also providing funding through the project for more positive management, and we've been very successful in increasing the number of farmers and crofters who are involved with us as part of the project. This is just one of the examples of how we've built new relationships, strengthening what we've already been doing for the last 15 years or so. This is a crofter called Sweeney, who's working with us on Lewis. Through the project, we got funding for the cattle collars, which really helped us in terms of no-fence technology and really helped organise and try to make sure that the grazing was right on the areas which had been previously undergrazed within the townships. Sweeney's so successful in terms of he's found this relationship so successful that he's actually increased the herd size of his cattle, more than doubled the cattle numbers. That's then led to the townships being managed in a far better way from a corncrake perspective, and we produce an awful lot more good quality corncrake habitat, and then that's led last year to the numbers more than doubling. So this is a very good example of, as I say, how we're working with farmers and the crofters to try and do positive management. Also, as part of the project, I mean, it's very important that we're not only talking to the farming audiences, but we're talking to the general public as well. So there's a whole series of activities that we've been doing at a local and a national level, ranging from taking school parties around through to running talks, running walks, all sorts of various different activities, running right the way through to sort of national engagement. This is a sort of touring exhibition where we've been going around the country. So this has been to quite a lot, well, pretty near all the major cities within Scotland. And we've been bringing people into the science centres and various places to sort of demonstrate the work that farmers and crofters are doing, and trying to explain to different audiences the importance of corncrakes, the importance of these crofting habitats, and the sort of landscapes that we're working on. And then the third element that we're doing through this project is looking at advocacy. So in terms of advocacy, what we're doing is talking to Scottish Government, we're talking to Nature Scot, and there's a couple of the staff members from Nature Scot here as well today. We're trying to basically develop the future replacements for our agri-environment schemes. We're trying to make sure that corncrake is part of the overall package that farmers will be available for. And we're also trying to make sure that there's case studies and technical leaflets and support for the farmers moving forward, and building through our partnerships. The lady that's there is Kemp Stewart. She's our corncrake champion for MSP, corncrake champion, who's been doing a great job in sort of helping promote work. So we're trying to build relationships, obviously, with the Scottish Parliament in terms of the work and the funding that will be coming through government. So that's sort of the end of the Corncrake calling side of things. As I say, we're coming towards the end of the 4 years of funding that we've got, but what we're doing now is through the advocacy plan. We're trying to build for the longer term, and at the heart of that will be the farmers and the crofting communities. And in terms of the sort of funding and replacement for funding, the current funding mechanisms for the Scottish Government. Just wanted, before we finished off, to sort of also highlight that RSPB is not only working on corncrakes in Scotland, it's also working on corncrakes in Northern Ireland, particularly on Rathlin. So on Rathlin Island, corncrakes died out, I think, just towards the end of the 1990s. Over the last 10 years, we've been successfully trying to put back in the right sort of habitats which would attract corncrakes back in. And they are, they are only a few miles away in terms of geography from the bottom part of the Inner Hebridean Islands. So our colleagues, and again there's 3 members of staff I think from RSPB Northern Ireland here as well, have been working to try and work with volunteers and work with staff members to improve the amount of habitat that's on the ground, and that's then led to sort of positive management. And we've increased the sort of type of management in a very similar way to how we would be doing it on our reserves across Scotland. One of the other things I should have said is that our RSPB, as well as working with farmers and landowners, we are obviously a landowner ourselves, and RSPB in Scotland's context zone manages land which has about 17% of the corncrake population. So it's important that we're doing it our best on our own reserves, but it's also very important that we're trying to do work elsewhere. And then, yeah, as I say, from a Northern Ireland perspective, I'm sorry, Northern Ireland colleagues, I've probably garbled my way through your really incredibly brilliant work. But what we're trying to do is to increase the number of volunteers and increase the amount of work that's going on. And from the point of view of going from no birds, we've now got, I think, 4 last year. So there's real progress being made in terms of the work that they've been doing with the partners. So thank you very much.
I think we'll take questions at the end for all the speakers, so if you can just hold on to any that you've picked up from Chris, and we'll get a proper discussion towards the end. I'd like to invite John, who you've heard from already this morning, up to tell you more about his own project. John, over to you again.
Hi everyone, hello again. I get to put my Corncrake LIFE project manager hat on now for 20 minutes. I'd like to talk to you about the project, its progress to date, some of the learning that we've derived from it, and also looking to the future as well. In order, I guess, to talk about the project's progress, I need to put it into context in terms of why there was a project in the first place, and give you a little bit of background information. Unfortunately, as we've already heard from Chris, the situation for corncrakes in Ireland mirrors that of the rest of Western Europe. In Ireland, the birds underwent a catastrophic decline from probably the late 1960s. Our first semi-accurate data on the bird population is from the late 1970s, so a lot of our baseline is based there. But if we take the late 1970s as our starting point, within 20 years, we'd lost 90% of the population, and their range had contracted by about 95%. So, as you know, it's a wipeout, is the only way to describe it in 20 years. And the birds were on a crash course for national extinction, other than in the mid-1990s, annual monitoring of the birds came into play, and a grant scheme was introduced, initially supported through RSPB, through Birdwatch Ireland, and then taken over by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And that scheme, which was a reactive model that identified where the birds were, put measures in place to protect them, is probably why we still have corncrakes today, that there was something there to stymie that extinction. However, despite all those efforts, in the 1990s and early noughties, we still suffered two major curtailments to a recovery of the corncrake population, one being the loss of the Moy Valley population. About an hour's drive from here is the Moy Valley. Fantastic floodplain meadows, corncrakes are gone from there. And of course, we unfortunately lost the Shannon Callows population, which at one point was half the national population. There are no corncrakes now left in the Shannon Callows. So all of our corncrakes in Ireland are now coastal birds. We no longer have floodplain corncrakes, which is a tragedy. On the back of this, it was felt that corncrake conservation, although there was some measures in place, it needed that nitro boost into the engine. So in 2018, the National Parks and Wildlife Service applied to the LIFE programme for a specific project for corncrakes, taking existing models and trying to improve it and scale it up. 6 million euro, just under 6 million euro was awarded to MPWS as the coordinating beneficiary, along with our 4 associated beneficiaries: ATU, Photo Wildlife Park, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and Údarás na Gaeltachta. And of course, we were due to start in 2020, and 2020 was a write-off, as we all remember. But we did get the project going at the end of 2020, and we did get a prolongation. So our 5-year life cycle still exists. Our project covers a huge area. Geographically, we follow the path of where the corncrakes are. In 2018, which was our base year for the application, these 8 sites you can see here covered 85% of the national population of corncrakes. So that is where the LIFE project was focused on working. We refer to these as catchments, and within these catchments are the Natura 2000 special protection areas for the birds. We are not, however, limited to working in Natura 2000. Corncrakes don't know where the SPA begins and ends. They go where the land is sympathetic to them. So corncrakes are often outside the SPAs. Sometimes there's more outside than inside. But we have the capacity to work at that landscape level, and that's absolutely crucial. Our overall operational area is just shy of 4,500 hectares, and our target within the LIFE programme was to try and get 1,000 hectares of that into management. And to do it, we had a team. So just back there, Ireland is pretty big if you're driving from Mallinhead down to Turbot Island. And yeah, 6 of us have to cover all of that. So we are a team of 6, and Lenny, the dog. But we are augmented. We have our 2 researchers, Andrea and Alfie, who you'll hear from today. And we also have 2 contractors, Patrick and Niall, who work with us on habitat management and monitoring. And without that full team, we just couldn't do what we do. And to be honest with you, we couldn't do what we do even with that team. So we are really lucky in that the existing grant scheme, which I mentioned before, which is run by the National Parks and Wildlife Service, it runs parallel to us. So along with the LIFE project, which is this kind of behemoth of a thing for 5 years trying to do all this work is happening parallel to us. And with the support of MPWS management, what we've done is we've taken that reactive model of the grant scheme, and we're now trying to form it into a more proactive model based on what we're doing in LIFE. So the MPWS Corncrake Conservation Programme is now established. They monitor the birds, they provide grants to farmers when we're not able to work, but they're also involved in proactive habitat management, as well as bringing in predation risk management, which is a key aspect for our ground nesting birds. So like every LIFE project, you have what they call specific component objectives. If anyone's worked on LIFE projects, there's all this terminology, drive you cracked, but it is useful. But our specific component objectives are very clearly laid out to us, but there is one absolutely crucial and fundamental objective, and that's this one: securing landowner cooperation and local community involvement and support. If you don't have that, I'm going to say it now, forget about it. If you do not have the landowners on board, the local community on board, if you do not pump resources into that, to have that level of support, you have no foundation to build on. You can skirt around the edges with your conservation work, but you'll not do it at scale. And for the last 3 years, we have buried ourselves in this at Corncrake LIFE. And because of the way we've done it, and we've done it with, I guess, an honesty about how we go about our business, it means that all of the other objectives have a foundation to be built on. And as ecologists, as a conservation manager myself, this is the bit I love. I love doing the work. I love creating ELCs and drawing up plans with farmers and planting crops and predator control and knowledge exchange and all that stuff. That is what we get into this game for, but you can't do any of it unless you've got the people on your side and on board with you. So in terms of we're 3 years complete, we're in our 4th year now. What has the progress been to date? I like to divide our progress into two kind of spatial scales. At the national level, we have seen a 35% increase in the Corncrake population in Ireland in 5 years. Now, Corncrake LIFE's only around for 3, so we can't take full credit for that. But we came in just at the right time when the birds seemed to be responding well to the MPWS measures that were in place. And we were able to take that and actually scale it up significantly. And the other massive piece of progress we've made is that Ireland is now entering into a new CAP cycle. We've got new national agri-environmental programs being rolled out. And the National Agri-Environmental Programme is referred to as ACRES, and we'll hear about it later on today. But within ACRES, there's a subset called the ACRES Cooperation Projects, and they are regionally targeted for priority habitats and species, priority land for Natura 2000. And we were able to take the learnings from our 100 pilot farmers and transfer that knowledge into the ACRES programme at national level, which means that our 100 farmers can become 200, 300, 400 farmers. And what we designed in Corncrake LIFE has effectively been absorbed into ACRES, pound for pound, penny for penny, like for like. There's nothing new. We've tried and tested it. The farmers are familiar with it. It's a seamless transition if we can make it work. At the catchment level, we've seen an 18% increase in the number of birds in our Corncrake LIFE catchments in the 3 years. And we've only really been operational on the ground properly for 2, because the first year you're finding your feet. We've got 1,600 hectares of land in management. We were only supposed to have 1,000. And that's because so many people wanted to join, so many people wanted to do more. It's fantastic to be working at that kind of scale. We've over 250 participants across the project brief, and those participants range from very active farmers whose sole income is the farm, right through to farmers who farm part-time. We also have private landowners who don't really farm at all, but we work with them too. We also have people where land has been unfarmed for 25, 30 years, and we're helping them restore it, get people back working it again. We also have a dedicated predator control programme, which is co-funded by the MPWS, and that now works in cooperation with Life on Mac. And that's very important, is that we identify landscape-level collaboration where we both have a need, where projects have needs, and we can come together to pool our resources to get the most out of it. We have a training and knowledge exchange base with over 150 farmers and advisors. That was made possible by additional funding from the Department of Agriculture. We don't like the idea of asking farmers to come to training events for free. Their time is valuable. Being able to pay them to do that is a game changer. And we have a huge host of community and schools programs, local events. It's really phenomenal, and we'll hear more about that too from our community engagement officers later today. How we've achieved what we've achieved has been via a two-pronged approach. The first approach is what I call direct action. And direct action is what we like to do in conservation. It's habitat restoration, it's work, it's predation risk management, it's out doing surveys, monitoring habitats, planning with farmers. That's the direct action that we undertake as conservationists. That's what we like to do. But the other thing that we do, which is absolutely crucial, is we socialise ideas. We make things that might seem new and innovative, we make them normal. So the idea of the results-based approach to farming schemes, that's an idea that's been around for a while, but hasn't really been present in areas with the corncrake. So we're able to take that idea, start it off with a few farmers, and then grow it and make it into a normal system. Be very, very clear about how we explain how your payments are generated and where they come from. And you'll have resistance at the beginning, but within 24 months, the farmers know the system better than you do. They know how they can generate better scores. They know what supporting actions are available to them. The other thing we do at project level is what we call integration by participation. We are active on the ground. We are active in the communities, responding to queries sometimes that have nothing to do with corncrakes, but where we can, because we're professionals in the ecological sector, provide a little bit of insight, a little bit of clarity. We do the same with our farmers as well. They can lift the phone and ask us questions, send a WhatsApp, send a text. They get a response instantly. We're available to them. We're participating in their farms as a third party, but it is still their farms. And it's the same with the land and the communities. We're involved. We want to be involved. We don't want to be skirting around the edges. We want to be integrated. And the final idea that we need to socialise, and we're trying to do this, is conservation as an economy. If we want wildlife, if we want carbon sequestration, if we want clean water and we want to attenuate water, we have to pay for it. And if we can create an economy for that, via a results-based agri-environmental programme, etc., people will respond to it. Farmers will respond to it, landowners will respond to it, because they know that they can get a fair and equitable payment for the production of more than just livestock or crops off their land. These are public goods and services that we need to be willing to pay for. One thing I want to focus on quickly is this concept of the results-based or outcome-based agri-environmental approach. This is not a linear system where you put something in on one end and get something out on the other end. And I think that's been lost recently with results-based. That results-based is just this great panacea that you just plug it in and you get an output. It is not linear. It is in fact a cycle. It's a cycle a bit like, here's an egg, turn it into a corncrake. Now, how the hell do you do that? You can't just give someone an egg and expect them to produce a corncrake out the other end. That egg is a prescription, and this is how results-based actually works. We need a prescription, and a prescription needs support, and support is resources. It's people, it's capital. So we give a prescription. We know what we want. But support needs guidance, and this is where we need dedicated specialists who know how to take that egg and incubate it so we can hatch it. So this is step one and step two of the results-based cycle. And guidance needs ownership. Birds nest on the ground because they know that the reward is greater than the risk. They've adapted that over millions of years. But for us working on conservation schemes, we need to take some ownership of the risk with the landowner as well. If we give a prescription and we guide it, we need to be a party to the risk as well, and ensure that economically the farmer isn't taking the major risk. And finally, ownership needs continuity. And what I mean about continuity here is corporate memory and local knowledge combined. Corporate memory allows us to have the people in place who know how everything works at that level. But that is not enough on its own. We need the people who know how everything works at ground level too. And those two things are absolutely intrinsically linked. So in terms of learning, I have so much I'd love to talk about, but we have 2 days and we have a captive audience, so you're going to hear plenty from us. But I do have one key message for everyone here in terms of the corncrake. This is very typical. Anyone who works on corncrakes kind of knows this. You have your calling male in the ELC, female probably nesting within 250 metres of him. And that's the level we think at. That's the level we operate at. But the reality is, these are very mobile birds. They move around. The young ones move around. They leave that patch. We need to think corncrake, but we need to act landscape. And that is why the Mullet Peninsula has seen a doubling of the number of birds here, because we are acting at a landscape level. We're thinking Corncrake, but we're acting landscape. If we take our basic measures that we want farmers to do, create the early cover plots, mow the fields wildlife friendly from the middle out, delay that mowing for as long as you possibly can. If we take that model and roll it out at scale, if we think Corncrake and act landscape, we will grow these populations. We've proven it. And this is what we will end up with. We will end up with a landscape that encourages farming with corncrakes, not for corncrakes. We want to farm with corncrakes. Every single action that we undertake, every field that's delayed by a week or two, every uncut margin that's left as a refuge area, every crop, every ELC, every action cumulatively has an impact on the landscape, and the birds benefit from it. And as Chris said, lots of other things benefit from it too. What about the future then? Well, I think we need to divide the future into two lots. What about Corncrake LIFE? Well, when it comes to Corncrake LIFE, we're very lucky in that the MPWS has committed to an afterlife plan that will be led by the existing Corncrake Conservation Programme, and it's absolutely crucial because we need to continue this dedicated support for farmers and for the acres team who have a long 4 or 5 years ahead of them, and it's the first step for national agri-environmental programs to be results-based. But you need dedicated support, you need specialist teams to help deliver that. And continuity is key. We need to combine local knowledge with corporate memory and lock things in. But what about Northwest Europe then? I think at that level we need to think Corncrake and act population range. I think we've got a lot of problems. There's successes, but there are huge risks here too. There is a need for much bigger cooperation across borders. The birds do not recognise borders. I think we need to look at the Pan-European Species Action Plan as well. I think it needs to be revisited, and I think it needs to be an action plan, not a paper plan. I think we know what needs to be done, and we need a plan for how it can be resourced. I think the farmers want it, the landowners want it, and we want it. And capacity building, I think, is key. There's a lot of extremely talented people in the room here, but every team, every area has its lacuna, and we need those areas filled with expertise. We need to train one another. We need to share knowledge. We need a Corncrake working group, really. So I've talked about landscapes a lot, and in the last 3 years I've learned a lot about landscapes, and I was looking through photos and I kind of realized when I think of a landscape, this is what I think of now. I think of mosaics, I think of traditional land management, I think of the people who lived there, the different characters, the stories. I think of the pace of life in these places is so much more healthy than in other places in Ireland where it's just go, go, go. And these are the places that will be the last bastion for our challenge for the biodiversity crisis. And it's just makes sense that there's corncrakes here. They're the indicator of all of this. And these places need to be protected. And the people in them and the farming in them needs to be protected. Sinead, Gur míle maith agah, and thanks for your time.
It's fantastic, John. It's absolutely brilliant to see such enthusiasm and commitment, and really thoughtful and rational thinking about how we go forward. Fantastic that you're leading this. Really impressive. Thank you for that. We will have some questions for you, I'm quite sure there'll be lots, but we'll take those at the end of this session. We've got one last presentation, folks, and that is a pre-recorded presentation from Dr. Crowley and Dr. Brendan O'Queeve, both independent researchers conducting socio-economic evaluation of Corncrake LIFE, also with Dr. Karen Keaveney of the School of Agriculture and Food Science at UCD in Dublin. So it's pre-recorded. I think it's ready to go, is it, guys? Yeah, I think so.
Rúsle. Is mis se brand an chuomh agus tá mé an saoileh ché go bhfuil ar lína inniuh lime chud lechaí Caroline Crowley. Gur magah as ocht an deis a chuirtúin leabhartliamh mar leabhar an meastachán atá idir lábha againn. Thank you for giving Caroline and me the opportunity to speak to you this morning about the socio-economic evaluation of the Corncrake LIFE. We're going to look at the methodology, the time frame, results, and recommendations. You're familiar with the study areas shown in the map on the left-hand side. We're working on a 3-stage evaluation. Today, we're going to zero in on the baseline. We're already working on the midterm, and you will be hearing from us again in the final evaluation. We're a 3-person team. 2 of us are here this morning, and our other colleague, whom you see in the photograph there on the left-hand side, is Dr. Karen Keaveney, Associate Professor of Rural Development in University College Dublin. In our evaluation, we have been working with 3 stakeholder groups that are listed on the screen in front of you. Firstly, the farmers and landowners, then other members of rural communities, and indeed wider sets of stakeholders with an interest in rural communities, and the professional agencies and service providers. To date, we have completed surveys, and some of you have participated in focus groups. You see the numbers there on the screen in front of you in terms of the number of people who responded to our surveys and participated in our focus groups. Caroline is now going to talk to you a little bit more about the methodological underpinnings and the findings and recommendations.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Hello, everybody. So starting now with the evaluation approach and the frameworks that we used to set the scene and to contextualise our evaluation of Corncrake LIFE in the baseline survey. And really the theme that was coming out very strongly for us as we were reading the literature and talking to the LIFE team and getting to know the project was this idea of integration. So early on, understanding that an integrated approach was part of the Corncrake LIFE approach, but it was also coming out very strongly in the literature. We were seeking a framework that could help us to contextualise Corncrake LIFE. So hearing from Scott Morrison of the Nature Conservancy, he said that creating populations disenfranchised by conservation efforts can set back conservation over the long, if not near term. He continues, in contrast, conservation that helps to solve problems for people can build much needed constituency and a more resilient socio-ecological system. So that helped to point us towards something called the Socio-Ecological System Framework, which you see on the left. And this framework, it's a very busy image, but just to simplify, the key points we want you to take from this is that as we set out the context and started to analyse background data from the Census of Population and the Census of Agriculture to understand the Corncrake LIFE catchments better, the circles in blue show you that we were looking at the social, economic and political settings of the project, thinking about the governance systems both locally in terms of the steering group and further afield in terms of regulatory authorities and departments, and also in terms of the actors all the way from farmers and the LIFE team through to the steering group members, but also other people wider and further afield, such as in PWS or Department of Agriculture or local authorities. And then the green circles reminded us that, of course, this was about nature conservation, so there was key aspects of the natural world were involved in the system we were going to be evaluating. The ecosystems more broadly, the resource systems of, for example, the landscape, and then the resource units being the farms themselves, or maybe even the particular plots. So we understood it just kept us in mind of all of the different aspects that needed to be considered and thought about in the evaluation. And the red reminds us that life is about particular actions, interactions, and outcomes. All of that was helping to signal to us that the natural and the social worlds are intertwined and interacting. And we know from contemporary debates around crises and the concept of polycrises and metacrises, we know that the crises are intertwined and interacting as well. So the solution for an issue in one realm, the natural world, for example, can worsen an issue in another key realm, such as the social world. So they need to be considered together, and it calls for integrated approaches. So all of that helped to set the scene for us on what we needed to be considering in the evaluation. And the other thing that we were aware very early on in talking with the LIFE team that we needed to be aware of was also, and this is coming from our work too as rural geographers, as workers with community development sector as well, that individuals are their lives are all of our lives. Integration is happening in our lives. All of the different strands of life come together in our homes, among our wider families, including the influence of ancestors. And then beyond the home, within the nearby community of neighbours and friends, and across the broader community of locals and volunteers. So the graphic below of the different threads coming together into that knot in the centre is really to symbolise that all of these individual strands, whether it's our work lives, our close relationships, our education, our health, all of these are coming together within the family, within the home, within the community. And that's signaling very strongly to us that we needed to be thinking about people alongside nature and how the project was working for both. So taking a look at some of the headline findings from our baseline survey, because we don't have a lot of time in this presentation, so we focused on a small number of findings and recommendations that we think will be helpful for your workshop today. So this idea of interwoven nature conservation and socio-economic development, we were thinking about what does that mean in terms of putting it into practice. And this has very much come out from our time spent analysing the results of the 3 surveys and what we found in the focus groups with the stakeholders afterwards as we looked to tease out those findings with them. And the findings are very much pointing in agreement with the earlier frameworks that we do need to consider nature conservation and socio-economic goals together. And that's the value, it's really flagging the value of a community development approach from the outset, because community development is all about working from the ground up, where the integration is happening, and also accounting for a very diverse knowledge, experience, and views. So bringing those different strands together as well from the outset. And there's an opportunity here to harness the coordination role of experienced development organisations that are out there locally and regionally. So altogether, really pointing towards the value of project design and planning, very much coming from the multi-stakeholder, place-based co-design and co-production way of thinking. On the right is a graphic that shows what's called the ladder of public participation. And the higher up you go in the ladder, the better the quality of the public participation, the quality of the engagement is with people. And it's all about calling on project developers and programs to move from doing to people or doing for people at the lower stages and the middle stages of the ladder to doing with in an equal and reciprocal partnership at the top of the ladder. That's where co-design and co-production sit. They're really best practice and very strong engagement practices. So what did the farmers tell us in the survey about how Corncrake LIFE was engaging in practice? We heard from them that the corncrake is coming here. So these are quotations from the survey. The corncrake is coming here because of the people, one said. The farmer's voice needs to be heard. Another told us special areas of conservation, or SACs, were dropped in without consultation. This is back with the designations in the 1990s in Ireland. It is better now. And the last one told us, Corncrake LIFE is our first experience of consultation. So we're already hearing that Corncrake LIFE is doing things differently, and it is engaging in practice. What the professionals told us was that they're also experiencing engagement from Corncrake LIFE Corncrake LIFE has demonstrated the invaluable experience of engaging with local communities versus the former designations when there was no engagement, including no engagement with local authorities. The Corncrake LIFE community engagement is creating a positive legacy for the next EU funding opportunity. So here, one of the professionals in local government is saying, the engagement that Corncrake LIFE is putting into practice isn't only good for building relationships with the farmers within the communities, but it's also good for working with people in local government as well. But what about co-production? What does co-production look like in practice? Is it happening in Corncrake LIFE? And Corncrake production is where you've moved beyond design and planning, and now you're actually doing the work. You're implementing the actions on the ground. So what did we hear about was co-production happening? And the farmers told us, and this is one of the quotes we had in a follow-up focus group where we looked at the findings of the survey with farmers. We have plenty of choice. One farmer told us, one participant, I had a query about fertiliser. I was apprehensive to ask Corncrake LIFE. I was told, you need to look after your crop, your enterprise. I was able to make that choice. I had support. It was left up to me. They're working alongside me. It's a completely different approach. So this is our first inkling that we are seeing coming through in the evaluation that co-production is happening in practice. So bringing that together with the social ecological framework of the fact that farmers live within households, wider families, within communities, what we get from the survey is the findings that most farmers were at least the second or third generation, and over half were at least the fourth or fifth generation. Over 100 years, their family had been farming land in the area. This indicates to us that the farmers, the participants in Corncrake LIFE, are likely to have the bearers of traditional knowledge and practices that have been developed locally by earlier generations, very much embedded in the natural and social fabric, if you like, the circular, a real embodiment of the circular economy locally. So our recommendation is certainly to include appropriate local farming knowledge and practices in the design and the implementation of projects from the outset, to combine traditional with scientific know-how. We know these graphics are going to be too small for you to read, but we just want to pull in some of the statements from and the Likert scales analysis, where we got to see what people felt about these ideas, and we can build out of it in future surveys in the midterm and the final. Moving out from the farmer in recognition of that wider household and family, what we found was over half of the participants in LIFE were influenced to join by another member of their family, especially their spouse or partner, and or their son. And those family members tended to also have higher rates of mainstream education, because we ask questions about that in our surveys. So our recommendation is to adopt a more household or family level approach to projects, to include other family members who are very interested, the kind of people that would be influencing farmers to join the project, and to include their interests, their know-how and their skills from the outset. And the last group that we want to flag to recognise and include from the broader community level in which farmers live and farm is to include local conservation advocates. So our findings was that prior to LIFE, farmers and locals were knowledgeable about Corncrake and advocating for its conservation. And it was envisaged that pupils who learned about Corncrake through the LIFE's school outreach would become local advocates too. And there was high awareness and trust in the LIFE team, but less confidence of having influence over the project. So our recommendation here is from the outset of project design and planning to identify and involve those locals who are already conserving the species or the habitats of interest before adding in new actions, engaging with them, recognizing, respecting and learning from their local knowledge, their local experience and their commitment, and also to increase trust in the LIFE project and local agency in the future of their own farms and communities. And we have a testimonial here from a local person who sent it in and shared it with us, and really hope that you do come back and look at the presentation and have a read of this testimonial, giving a really vivid example of how a local farmer as early as the 1980s was advocating with a neighbour on how to conserve the corncrake and how successful that intervention was. Altogether, these findings are inviting us to consider our collective future together in terms of the natural world and the social realm. So they're pointing towards designing a model of farming with nature around the natural and social worlds. So the findings in the survey that are coming through are very much about that the future of corncrake in Ireland depends on farming with nature. Well, we know that in terms of the ecology of corncrake and its habitat, it does benefit from appropriate farming interventions. It indicates a coupled human and environment system in which the social and natural components interact with one another. So clearly corncrake is an example of that kind of positive relationship between humans and biodiversity. But the current farming model, we know, erodes the interwoven natural and social fabric of corncrake areas. For example, what was coming through from the survey, but we know from that broader context piece, there's low incomes for farmers in these parts of the country through the industrial farming sector. And there's also comments were received around the fact that there were designations of land that impacted on farming incomes without any compensation. And at the same time, added to that, farmers can see and are hearing from the young people in the households that the next generation's interest in farming is undermined by unviable farming income. So taking all of those together, again, knitting together the natural and the social, it really is pointing to developing a model of farming with nature that is locally integrated, that it can serve the natural and the social goals together, and that is also adaptable to the complexity of local natural and social conditions, so that within local areas, just like a LIFE project is able to do, it can work with what is presenting locally. Now, focusing in on what a model of farming with nature might do in practice if it was locally integrated and adaptable. Let's look at the LIFE payments for the farmers. The next two quotes are from participants. So one said, contractors are charging too much. For example, I got €1,500 for my early late cover plot. The contractor got €1,400 for his work on the plot, ploughing, digger work, spreading 3 loads of farmyard manure and fencing using 16 stakes. I supplied the wire, so I probably will have nothing out of the plot, maybe €30. This return will not encourage new entrants. Another said, if a landowner joined the scheme with the expectation of revenue covering some farming expenses due to inflation realised in 21-22, this may no longer be the case in many circumstances. So we're hearing about the real costs of doing the actions as exemplified in contractor costs, and the risk of inflation. Community and stakeholders also had an opinion. Community stakeholders, here's quotes from 2. It seems brilliant, as in the LIFE project, but there may be issues around making sure it pays appropriately. Another agreed, it's valuable for nature as long as the farm family can thrive too. So from the community, the perspective is it needs to be working for both. A professional said, farmers are providing such important services and need to be rewarded. Payments shouldn't dry up, but instead continue to remunerate their work. And that's flagging the fact that the LIFE project is time-bound. So the findings are telling us locally integrated and adaptable in terms of the LIFE payment, with the findings showing there was uncertainty around the financial consequences of the project. This was the baseline in 2022, so it was early days. There was some concerns it could reduce low farming incomes further. And then regarding the LIFE payment specifically, we heard there about the costs of hiring a contractor. We also heard that farming on the islands could incur higher costs and of course the risk of inflation. So the recommendation is to develop payments for something like nature conservation with local informants to ensure they're fair, appropriate and attractive. And the last high-level finding that we want to flag in our presentation today is planning for new homes and nature conservation. It's another example where being locally integrated and adaptable would be really, really beneficial. So we heard from the community and farmers in these quotations. There needs to be a balance between population decline in rural areas and conservation with regard to planning for families who want to settle there. Another, people in these areas were also very aware of inappropriate planning. One said, sadly, we are too late for Dunfanaghy. We are not protecting them properly. Holiday homes seem to be more important. This is so wrong. Not hearing this bird will be terrible. People were making a distinction between planning for homes for young people wanting to live there and workers living locally versus holiday homes. They were making a distinction. And then someone from the planning sector was also able to give us some information from their local authority area. And they advised that there have been less than 10 cases where either corncrake or other species have been a reason for planning refusal. So that's according to this stakeholder. Difficulties tend to be unrelated. For example, a refusal is because of ground conditions and effluent, safe road access or sightlines. The solution, they said, was taking a managed approach, a balanced approach to national objectives. Therefore, it's not a blanket ban. So you can hear the local professional talking about that adaptive approach. The communication piece, they said, is important, including through local engagement to address myths. Therefore, our final wrap up on the findings and recommendation is the following. There is a perception coming through in the survey that, in the evaluation, that Natura 2000 conservation objectives can pose an obstacle for new home building. And this is a really key issue for local people, because living locally is vital for people to meet their needs around childcare, around elder care, and so much more. Also, local workers want to be able to live locally. We heard teachers as an example in local schools. But also the awareness that a holiday home development should not be prioritised as well over corncrake habitat. So the recommendation is to commission research into planning refusals for new homes that's related to corncrake or Natura 2000 in the 3 counties where the Corncrake LIFE is happening, to determine what is the extent of the issue. Let's get the data, and based on those findings, establish what practices work well, because we did hear, and we don't have time to share them with you today, we did hear of good local authority planning department practice, but also what may need to change, because we heard of practices that weren't working on the ground for people. And by doing so, ensure that conservation and planning goals are joined up to contribute to positive relations between corncrake and community. So that's a very quick little flavour of some of the high-level findings coming out of the evaluation. Thank you very much for your attention, and Brendan and I are here and very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks very much to Caroline and Brendan for that. They are on a WebEx link. I can't see them anywhere. Can I see them somewhere? No. But they are available on the WebEx link to answer questions. So we'll take some questions now. We've had fantastic 3 talks to kick us off. I'm very interested in that last one. Some of Caroline's comments there, the findings from that study, very much reflect the findings in a recent book by Bill Sutherland from Cambridge University, Transforming Conservation, which has taken some new approaches and really looking to unlock some of these kind of intractable blockages that we find in conservation. So some of the findings we're working alongside communities is very interesting. Anyway, questions for Chris, for John, for Caroline and Brendan, and if you could indicate by sticking your hand up, and then when I come to you, say your name and your role or location, and I'll try and direct the question appropriately. So. It's very hard to see, actually. Questions? Anybody? Anne-Marie.
I don't know where John is. Where is he?
Microphone.
Okay. Oh, right. Well, I can't. It's a question for John.
It's okay. Ask the question.
Well, the question was, I mean, amazing stuff here today. I've written a lot of notes, especially about the socio-economic stuff. It's been amazing. But it was really to ask John what things haven't gone right, because obviously that's where a lot of our learning comes from, isn't it? Because it sounds as if the Corncrake have really responded, but that was my question.
Anybody else from Corncrake Life want to?
Oh,
Please
right.
here.
Do you want me to
Anne-Marie, repeat your question.
repeat it?
Question for you from Anne-Marie.
Okay. Hi, John. Anne-Marie. So I was just saying there, I thought the talks were amazing. I've written about 5 pages of notes already. You know, a lot of learning comes from what things haven't gone right, and we got a lot from the socio-economic. So obviously you're seeing a great response, but are there things that haven't gone right that you've really learned from?
Yeah, absolutely. We could write a book on the things that didn't go right, and the farmers will tell you all about it too. I mean, if I move directly into conservation measures thinking, we are trying to re-establish a lot of crop growing in areas where traditionally there would have been crops growing, and we're not experts at growing crops, so the first few that we put in the ground, they didn't grow anything. And that's a failure, and I mentioned that in terms of risk. We have to own that risk. We have to take ownership of that and say, we'll pay you to do it, and if it doesn't work, it won't have cost you anything. It'll work the next time because we'll have taken the lesson of what went wrong and we'll try it again. And we don't talk enough about that in conservation, of what doesn't work. But I think what's key to changing that narrative is ownership of the risk with the farmer as well, and not putting the entire gamble on them to undertake something innovative and something new.
I think that's a very good point, John. I think one of the problems we often have with time-limited projects as well is that you can get halfway through a project, you know something's going wrong, but there's an unwillingness often to change it halfway through because it's hassle, it's difficult, and sometimes we have to bite that bullet, and I think we're learning that now, and it's great that you've recognised that and applying it appropriately. Yeah. Any more questions? Catherine.
Hi, Catherine Keena from Teagasc. I just wondered if Caroline and Brendan had or maybe will assess the agricultural advisor and their role and how we interact with them.
I think actually Caroline, they're gone back into the lobby but they have discussed with the agricultural advisors as part of the socio-economic assessment. So that would have been part of the professional cohort that they would have ran the questionnaires through. So yeah, their input is definitely in there.
Super. There must be more than 2 questions. Yeah. One over here.
Good morning, Micheál O'Brien. I used to work for the European Commission, but I'm here as a private individual. Fascinating, and I think really the dimension of bringing the social into this. If I look back, I think over the past 30 years, and not sure 2000, we were very much in need of more social engagement in terms of making progress on conservation. Just 2 questions to Chris in relation to his presentation from the RSPB. He did show the worrying decline from 2014, and he did allude to the fact that the incentives or the farming system, the agri-environment measures, were not as supportive. I mean, it would be good just to get a little bit more clarity. Was it that the payments were shallower and broader, which is always a risk in agri-environment systems? Or was it that there was some essential ingredient that became unattractive to farmers? And the second question also to Chris would be, he did also refer to the fact that RSPB themselves have significantly invested in land for corncrakes so that there's nature reserves. And that's not an approach that to any extent has been taken in Ireland, although Birdwatch Ireland, and there was a previous LIFE project which brought this excellent ecologist beside us, Dave Sotheby, to Ireland to work on LIFE in Termacara, which I think is an important part of the story as well. But what does Chris think in terms of, we talk, it's primarily a private land ownership thing, but what's the role of nature reserves for corncrakes as well? Thank you.
Chris, you have a microphone.
Okay, so on the answer to the first question, so yeah, what happened basically was that when Scottish Government were developing their what is now the current agri-environment and climate scheme, so that's basically the funding that farmers get for delivery quite a lot of this corncrake work. They made some decisions to alter the payment rates for some of the options, and they really did quite dramatically reduce, particularly the late cut options, which a lot of the farmers were currently using, and basically it made it less attractive from a farmer perspective to delay the mowing and the cutting until after 1st of September. And it was particularly between the 1st of September cutting, the amount of money that they used to get for the 1st of September cutting dates as compared to the 15th of August cutting dates. And there used to be a really big difference in terms of the amount of money that you got, and so the disadvantage of cutting later in terms of the quality of the product that you got in terms of the grasslands was compensated for better under the previous scheme than the current one. So I mean, RSPB spent a long time talking to the Scottish Government, trying to persuade them to, well, at least move back towards the payment rates that they were doing, and we had some success in doing that. But there's no doubt that in terms of farmer interest, particularly for cutting after 1st of September, the payment rates were one of the issues. And I think, yeah, if there's one sort of take-home message that we can basically sort of share from our work over the last sort of 15, 20 years or so, if you get the payment rates wrong, the options pretty much stayed the same in terms of the agri-environment schemes, but because the options payment rates were changed, that really was a massive disincentive to the farmers. And so from a farmer and crofter point of view, they were making logical decisions in terms of, yeah, balancing the benefits from a corncrake point of view against the benefits of growing crops and growing the business side of the case. In part of what we've done through Corncrake Calling is we've managed to find alternative ways to compensate some of the farmers outside of agri-environment schemes. The other thing I would say is that if you look at the brilliant work that's being done in Ireland through this results-based payments, Scotland at the moment hasn't gone down the route of doing a sort of full results-based approach. We have, through the support of Nature Scot, looked to trial the various approaches, and we've sort of trialled it in mac habitats and various other habitats, and looked at how a results-based approach could work. With Scottish Government at the moment are in the developing their new schemes, and there's still a debate going on within Scotland about whether to go down the route of results-based approaches or whether they carry on with a more sort of prescriptive approach, which is what we've currently got. And then, the one final thing I would say about the agri-environment, if you look to apply as a crofter to get into agri-environment schemes, it's enormously complicated. So the incredible simple paperwork that you have to do for Corncrake LIFE, I mean, it's chalk and cheese in terms of what we have to do as advisors when we're supporting crofters. It's a really serious undertaking from a farmer and crofter point of view. And so some of the farmers have then been put off in terms of actually applying in the first place, just purely because of the complexity of the schemes, the cost of employing an agent to actually do the work. RSPB has a certain number of staff who go out and provide the advice, but we can't cover everywhere, and we don't get the government funding for doing that. Yeah, so that's the sort of the first question. In terms of the second question, yeah, so RSPB, as I say, we've got a series of nature reserves, and we're a very large landholder across the UK for a variety of different species. We've got, yeah, roughly 70% of the population. It varies slightly from year to year in Scotland context, dependent on how well the populations are doing. But it's very important, obviously, from our point of view, that we're doing that, but also we recognise that we can't do all of it just purely as being a landowner. For instance, if we're talking about where Claire, who's one of my colleagues who's here today, who works out on the US, we can't own the land out there, so we have to work in partnership with others. So it's always going to be an essential component, and really the most important component is working with the farmers and the crofters to actually try and improve things. But yeah, from an RSPB perspective, yeah, we do have, you know, a number of sites and a number of places that we are managing the land and for the benefit of Corncrake and for other wildlife.
Thanks, Chris. One last question from Dennis Strong.
Sorry, thanks, Alan. Dennis Strong is my name. I'm the Divisional Manager of Parks and Wildlife here in Mayo. And I've been involved in the Corncrake conservation efforts since 1993, since the first national census. And we've tried different formula down over the last 3 decades. And as just come back to Micheál O'Brien's comment regarding nature reserves, I would have severe reservations simply because the context for a landowner of yet another designation on the land does not bring welcome news. And I think the formulas we've been using from, I think we have a good formula now. There's work on different formulas have been tried, and as John Carey pointed out in his presentation, the birds don't necessarily recognise the difference between an SPA and a non-SPA, and invariably they'll vote with their feet or their wings and go to where the conditions are best suited to them. So nature reserves here and the designation of them could bring a negative connotation to this conservation effort. And I think, as John pointed out as well, really well, what I've learned over 3 decades of this work is just bring communities with you and let the communities get involved, as we have done here. And the examples you'll see over the next couple of days really demonstrates that well. I do know, and I don't mind saying here, that the designation of SPAs in Donegal was not well received, and it caused huge problems to the conservation effort there. And slowly but surely we've corrected those wrongs, as it were, and engaged better with the communities there. So I think, to sum up, I'm not in favour of specific designations, because, as I said, corncrakes will go to where the suitable habitat is, and landowners will have much more buy-in and engagement where something has not been forced upon them, where it's done voluntarily. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Well, it's a strong endorsement of the community approach, undoubtedly. I think we'll finish there for the session, folks. You're free to go to lunch. Lunch is just outside. If you can come back as quickly as you can, but no later than 2 o'clock, please, for the start of the next one. We've got 4 excellent talks to follow up. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you afterwards.